Those who stand on tiptoe don't stand firm. Those who rush don't get very far. Those who try to eclipse others dim their own light. These words, attributed to Lao Tzu, resonate deeply when we reflect on the way we often approach our lives. The desire for control, the relentless pursuit of success, and the attempt to shape the world to our will can end up distancing us from what we really want. Taoists have long observed that human beings often act counterproductively. In our haste to achieve something, we force situations and, ironically, create more obstacles along the way. This excessive force puts us in a cycle of resistance that, instead of taking us forward, pulls us back. We try to improve the world, but in doing so without understanding the natural flow of things, we often introduce new problems instead of lasting solutions. This phenomenon can be observed in many aspects of life. The more we try to impress someone we're attracted to, the less natural we seem. The anxiety to make a good impression makes us artificial, distant from our essence, and paradoxically, less attractive. The same happens in performance situations. An actor, musician, or athlete who has rehearsed exhaustively may find that, at the crucial moment, internal pressure blocks their abilities, making everything more difficult. In these cases, the problem is not a lack of preparation or knowledge. We know enough, we practice enough, but it's precisely over-trying, over-controlling every detail that gets in the way. Our rational mind tries to take charge of the situation, analyzing, anticipating, and planning every move. However, this over-analysis can become a trap, disconnecting us from the state of natural flow. The Taoist thinker Lao Tzu recognized this human tendency to try to force the course of things instead of allowing them to follow their natural rhythm. He saw how people get lost in their own mental elaborations and, by trying to swim against the current, drift further away from what they want. But what if there was a different way of approaching life? What if, instead of trying to control everything around us, we could harmonize with the flow of things? This doesn't mean passivity or inertia, but finding a way to act without forcing, to allow nature to take its course rather than resisting it. Lao Tzu suggests that true skill lies not in dominating the world by force, but in understanding and aligning with it. This principle is at the basis of one of the most important concepts in Taoism, Wu Wei, or effortless action. But how does this work in practice? What does it really mean not to push and still be able to move forward in life? How can we apply this knowledge in our daily lives, in the small and big decisions we make? To explore these questions, we first need to understand Lao Tzu's thinking and his conception of the Tao, the Way. It is at the heart of all Taoist philosophy, and according to Lao Tzu, by aligning ourselves with it, we can live more harmoniously, lightly, and effectively. However, understanding the Tao is not a simple task, as its essence is beyond words and rational concepts. Lao Tzu makes it clear from the start of his most famous work, the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be spoken is not the eternal name. So if the Tao is beyond our intellectual comprehension, how can we experience it? How can we recognize it in our lives? And most importantly, how can we live according to it? In the next few moments, we'll explore the answers that Lao Tzu left us and how we can apply his wisdom to our journey. Taoist philosophy is not a set of rigid rules, but an invitation to perceive reality in a different way. It's a call to free ourselves from the compulsion to control everything and instead learn to flow with life. This approach can transform not only the way we act, but also our relationship with the world and with ourselves. If you've ever felt frustrated by trying with all your might, only to see things go wrong, or if you feel like you're swimming against the current in life, then Lao Tzu's teachings can bring a new perspective. And throughout this video, we'll explore how this ancient wisdom can still help us today. So stick with me and discover how Taoism and the Wu Wei principle can offer a path of least resistance and greatest harmony in your life. If Lao Tzu really lived, his existence dates back to a period between the 5th and 6th centuries BC, making him a contemporary of Confucius. However, unlike Confucius's rigidly structured moral and social system, Lao Tzu presented a radically different perspective on life, governance, and human existence. His masterpiece, the Tao Te Ching, is considered the main scripture of Taoism, and even with all the uncertainty about its authorship and date of composition, its influence has spanned millennia and lives on to this day. The Tao Te Ching is a work shrouded in mystery. Its enigmatic text has been interpreted in countless ways over the centuries, making it one of the most translated works of world literature. Although some scholars believe it was written as a governance manual for a leader, its lessons transcend politics and apply to the life of anyone seeking harmony and understanding of the natural flow of existence. Lao Tzu not only describes how a ruler can lead wisely, allowing the people to govern themselves without coercion, but also offers principles for any individual who wishes to live in a more balanced way and in tune with the universe. Throughout the text, Lao Tzu emphasizes qualities such as humility, flexibility, and moderation. He contrasts these virtues with the dangers of pride, excess, and rigidity. A ruler who imposes his rules in an authoritarian way, or an individual who seeks absolute control over life, is doomed to failure. Strength often becomes weakness, and the desire for power ends up generating resistance. The Tao Te Ching teaches us that to lead is to trust, that softness overcomes hardness, and that paradoxically, the one who puts himself in an inferior position is the one who really prevails. Through metaphors and poetic reflections, Lao Tzu describes a path that seems contrary to conventional logic. He writes, "Those who are rigid and hard are disciples of death. Those who are soft and flexible are disciples of life." This idea is in line with observations from nature. The most rigid tree is the first to be blown down by the wind, while bamboo, which bends, survives storms. This philosophy can also be applied to human life. When we try to cling rigidly to beliefs, relationships, or situations that no longer serve us, we become vulnerable to suffering. But when we are flexible, accepting life's natural changes, we find a path to greater serenity and resilience. At the heart of Lao Tzu's teachings is a fundamental concept, the Tao. This mysterious force that governs the universe is described as omnipresent and incomprehensible to the human mind. The Tao is the natural flow of things, the essence that permeates everything around us, working without force and without haste. Unlike Western conceptions of a personal deity, the Tao is not a conscious being, but a universal principle that guides everything from the growth of plants to the movement of the stars. The Tao acts unintentionally, and yet everything manifests from it. For Lao Tzu, living harmoniously means aligning with the Tao rather than fighting against it. But how to do this in practice? How to recognize this invisible flow that permeates existence? The answer lies not in a set of fixed rules, but in a state of mind, observing, trusting, and allowing. This is the essence of Taoism, and it's what sets this philosophy apart from other traditions that emphasize control and manipulation of the external world. But if the Tao is something we can't see, touch, or measure, how can we be sure of its existence? The answer lies in direct experience. When we stop resisting circumstances and learn to observe without compulsively intervening, we realize that life has its own rhythm. Things happen, challenges arise, but instead of fighting them, we can learn to move with the flow. This is the secret of a harmonious life, and it's also the key to understanding one of Taoism's most paradoxical concepts, Wu Wei, or effortless action. Lao Tzu invites us to a new way of looking at life, an invitation to abandon the constant struggle for control and discover the wisdom of simply allowing things to flow as they should. So, what is the Tao? This is an essential question, within Taoist philosophy, and at the same time, one that can never be fully answered. Lao Tzu tells us that the Tao cannot be fully understood by the human mind because it is beyond the categories we use to describe the world. Any attempt to define it would already be a distortion of its true essence. In the first verse of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu states, "The Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be spoken is not the eternal name." This means that any description of the Tao is only an imperfect representation, an attempt to put into words something that is beyond the human intellect. The Tao is not a concept that can be fully understood, but something that can be experienced and lived. Taoist philosophers describe the Tao as the fundamental force that drives the universe, the natural flow of things. Everything that exists, from the stars in the sky to the streams flowing down the mountains, follows the course of the Tao. It is the underlying order of all things, an invisible force that permeates and guides everything around us. We cannot control it, only align ourselves with it or resist it. This idea may seem abstract, but it can be understood by observing nature. A river, for example, doesn't try to make its way through the mountains by brute force. It goes around obstacles naturally, carving out its own route over time. Trees don't force themselves to grow, they simply develop according to their natural cycle. This is the way of the Tao, to allow things to happen spontaneously without unnecessary resistance. But if the Tao is something we can't fully understand, how can we experience it? Lao Tzu doesn't provide a detailed manual on how to align with the Tao, but his words offer valuable clues. He emphasizes the stillness of the mind, the ability to observe without judging, and the wisdom of not trying to control everything. From this emerges one of the most important principles of Taoism, Wu Wei, or effortless action. The concept of Wu Wei is paradoxical, as it suggests that the best way to act is through non-action. But this doesn't mean inactivity or passivity. Instead, Wu Wei teaches us to act according to the natural flow of things, without forcing situations or swimming against the current. When we follow Wu Wei, our actions become more effective because they flow spontaneously and harmoniously without wasting energy. Imagine an athlete who is at the peak of his performance. He is not consciously thinking about each movement, but simply acts, allowing his body to move naturally without tension. In the same way, a musician who is immersed in music doesn't think about each note in isolation, but allows the melody to flow through them. These are examples of Wu Wei in action. Moments when we are completely present, without excessive effort, without resistance, just flowing with the situation. Lao Tzu teaches us that often our attempt to control everything around us is what causes us suffering. When we want to manipulate events, impose our will on others, or fight against circumstances, we create resistance and frustration. Instead, if we learn to trust the natural flow of life, we will see that many things happen on their own without the need for interference. This idea can be challenging for those who have grown up in a culture that emphasizes hard work, discipline, and control. However, Wu Wei is not the opposite of effort, but rather a different way of approaching action. It's about acting at the right time without wasting energy. Just as a martial arts master doesn't attack with brute force, but uses the opponent's own movement against him, one who lives according to Wu Wei finds the right moment to act and does so lightly and effectively. Living this way requires a change of perspective. Instead of trying to control every aspect of our lives, we can learn to trust the flow of things. This doesn't mean that we should never take initiative or set goals, but rather that we should learn to recognize when it's time to act and when it's better to wait. Often, the best solution comes not from excessive effort, but from patience and the ability to observe before acting. How can we incorporate this philosophy into our interactions, our work, and our search for balance? How can we learn to trust the natural flow of life and act without forcing it? The answer lies in practicing simplicity, acceptance, and attentive perception of the present moment. The concept of Wu Wei is multifaceted and can manifest itself in different ways in our lives. It doesn't simply mean doing nothing, but rather allowing things to flow without excessive interference. Lao Tzu teaches that excessive force and the desire for control often lead to the opposite consequences of what we want. Instead of trying to shape reality according to our wishes, we must learn to work with what is already present, adapting to the natural flow of life. Wu Wei's idea can be observed in many aspects of existence. For example, in the area of leadership, a good ruler or manager doesn't try to exert absolute control over everything and everyone. Instead, they create the conditions for things to happen as smoothly as possible, trusting in the process and in people's ability to manage themselves. This is reflected in the way great leaders operate. The most effective are those who inspire and trust rather than micromanaging and imposing their authority at every turn. Lao Tzu wrote that great leaders lead from a place of non-action. They act only when necessary, trust the process, and let nature do its work. In the context of everyday life, this same idea can be applied in different ways. We often try to control every aspect of our routine, always seeking maximum productivity and efficiency. However, this unbridled quest for control can lead to exhaustion and stress, resulting in the exact opposite of what we want. Wu Wei teaches us that there is a time to act and a time to allow things to take their natural course. When we stop fighting the rhythm of life and allow ourselves to flow with it, we find a state of greater serenity and harmony. This approach also applies to relationships. We often try to influence or change the people around us, believing that we know what's best for them. However, this attitude can lead to unnecessary resistance and conflict. Wu Wei reminds us of the importance of accepting others as they are and allowing each person to follow their own path. This doesn't mean being indifferent, but learning to trust that each individual has their own pace of growth and development. Another clear example of Wu Wei can be found in learning and creativity. When we try to force an idea or try too hard to find a solution, we often feel blocked. This is because the mind is tense, trying to exert total control over the process. However, when we relax and let go of the internal pressure, answers and ideas usually emerge spontaneously. This explains why many great ideas emerge when we are at rest, such as taking a bath or going for a walk. Wu Wei suggests that instead of insisting on absolute control, we can create space for the solution to reveal itself naturally. Non-intervention can also be applied to the way we deal with challenges. Often, when faced with problems, our first reaction is to try to solve them immediately, applying hasty solutions. However, the best response is not always to act in the heat of the moment. Wu Wei teaches us to observe the situation before acting, allowing time and the natural wisdom of life to guide us to the best decision. This principle is present in many philosophical and spiritual traditions, which teach that patience and careful observation often result in more effective solutions than immediate reaction. Imagine the difference between trying to tame a horse by pulling hard on its reins, rather than learning to ride by following its natural movement. The first method generates resistance and conflict, while the second allows for a more fluid and harmonious interaction. This is the Wu Wei principle in action. By learning to align ourselves with the natural rhythm of life, we reduce unnecessary effort and increase our effectiveness. Lao Tzu also reminds us that simplicity is often the key to a balanced life. He encourages us to reduce our need for control, accumulation, and attachment to the superfluous. Modern society encourages us to seek more money, more status, more security. However, the Tao Te Ching suggests that true happiness lies in simplicity, in the ability to appreciate life without trying to grasp it too tightly. Wu Wei is therefore a reminder that less is often more. How can we learn to trust the natural flow of events? How can we find a balance between action and acceptance? Lao Tzu invites us to reflect on our own attitudes and consider whether we are swimming against the current or learning to flow with it. Wu Wei is not just an abstract concept, but a tool that can transform the way we live, bringing more lightness, peace, and harmony to our daily lives. We must be brave enough to escape from our intellectual presence of assumptions, concepts, and categories, and commit ourselves to the world as it really is. Lao Tzu invites us to free ourselves from excessive thinking, from the artificial constructions we impose on reality, and to rediscover a state of spontaneity and simplicity. The ideal of the block without sculpture symbolizes this original purity. In Taoism, this concept refers to a natural state of being, not shaped by external pressures, social conventions, or internal compulsions. The idea is not to reject knowledge, but to prevent it from trapping us in a cycle of excessive control and analysis. We often fail to act or make decisions because our minds are overloaded. We get caught between fears, expectations, and the need to predict every possible outcome. This leads to states of anxiety, procrastination, or even paralysis. We lose the fluidity of the present moment and become disconnected from the natural flow of life. Wu Wei teaches us to dissolve this resistance, allowing us to enter a state of flow where actions emerge naturally and efficiently. The state of flow is something that many of us have experienced, even without realizing it. When we are completely immersed in an activity, be it playing an instrument, writing, practicing a sport, or even having a deep conversation, our rational mind withdraws and we simply act. In those moments, we're not worried about the outcome. We're not trying to control every detail. We just move with the energy of the moment. This is Wu Wei in action. On the other hand, when we try to control our actions excessively, when we worry excessively about every word we're going to say, every step we're going to take, our mind enters a state of resistance. And this resistance prevents us from acting naturally. A classic example of this is the experience of public speaking. Someone who has exhaustively rehearsed their speech can end up stalling at the time of the presentation precisely because their mind is trying to control every word and gesture. But those who trust the moment, who let themselves be carried away by the energy of the situation, usually convey their message with much more impact and naturalness. The practical application of Wu Wei can also be seen in the way we deal with challenges. When we encounter a problem, our natural tendency is to try to solve it immediately by imposing forced solutions. However, many situations resolve themselves if we just allow space for the natural process to take place. When we try to control too much, we create frustration and conflict. But when we learn to wait, observe, and trust, we often find answers that weren't visible to us before. Taoist philosophy also teaches us that rigidity leads to disruption, while flexibility leads to survival and harmony. This can be seen in nature. A very rigid tree can be blown over by a storm, while a flexible plant bends with the wind and remains intact. In life, this flexibility translates into our ability to adapt, to change, to accept challenges without excessive resistance, and to be open to new possibilities. Wu Wei does not mean inactivity, but rather the ability to act at the right time, with the minimum of effort and resistance. If we reflect on our own lives, we can see how often we try to force situations that simply aren't ready to happen. The more we try to push something against its nature, the more resistance we encounter. But when we learn to listen to the rhythm of life, to trust the process, and to act at the right time, everything seems to flow more simply and effectively. This is the true essence of Wu Wei, acting without unnecessary effort, allowing life to happen in its own time. Finally, the practice of Wu Wei is an invitation to look inwards and recognize where we are resisting, where we are trying to control too much, and where we can simply allow things to flow. It's a call to trust life more and our need for predictability and absolute control less. The more we align ourselves with the natural flow of things, the more we find peace, clarity, and efficiency in our actions. If this reflection brought value to you, if it helped you see your life more lightly or made you think in a new way, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to support this work and ensure that more content like this continues to be produced, consider contributing a valeur demise of any amount. Your support makes all the difference and helps get this message out to more people. Thanks for following, and see you in the next video.